It's been about 2 weeks since the Lost Caverns of Ixalan launched, and it had some pretty exciting cards in the set. Among them were some of these new cards called Special Guest, including cards like Mana Crypt, Lord of Atlantis, and Polyraptor. While these reprints are really exciting and hopefully will bring down the price of singles, is that actually the case? Or is this just creating an alternate version of these cards that is borderless and has cool art that is more expensive than the base version, basically making these reprints meaningless to the average player? And with them being rarely found in packs and not in every single one, are most of the cards good and things you want to get, or are you going to be opening up these rare cards that aren't really worth anything and are not exciting? Let's talk about all of it now that we've had them in our hands for a couple weeks now. For those of you who don't know, Special Guests are reprints from Magic's past put into a borderless frame and with art matching the plane we're on, found rarely in set boosters and slightly less rarely in collector boosters. They range in rarity, and Lost Caverns of Ixalan was the first set to feature them, but they're going to be in every standard set moving forward. These don't impact format legality, and so there's some spicy cards in here that would never be printed into standard, like Mana Crypt. So let's break down the stats. There are 18 special guests, and they range in rarity from uncommon to mythic. The uncommons are pretty uninspiring. There's things like Breaches, Dargo, Malcolm, Pitiless Plunderer, and Star Compass. The big one here is Pitiless Plunderer, which originally was an uncommon in Rivals of Ixalan, but is pretty much a must-run in any deck that cares about creatures dying. It was going for about $12 despite being an uncommon before, and this one's a little different because not only was it a special guest, but it was also in the Lost Caverns of Ixalan commander decks, so there were two sources of a reprint here. Despite that, this version is going for $11.04. And it's not like it didn't reduce the price. The card from the commander deck, the one in the normal art and the normal frame, is going for about $6.87. So the price did drop. But is that because of the commander reprint or because of the special guest slot? Let's take a look at a card that only got the special guest slot and see if it maybe had the same effect. Star Compass. It's not a card that's necessarily that crazy, but it was going for about $1 before the reprint was announced. That same version from before is going for about 71 cents, so it did see a decrease in price, but the special guest slot's going for $1.65, which is more than the card was going for before. At this point, I think you're starting to see the pattern. The special guest card itself will actually be worth about the same or even a little bit more than the card was previously, and the normal versions of the card will go down in price, which I think is great. It gives a collectible version and a playable version, which is a great way to make collectors happy and a great way to make players happy. Affordable cards and things you can collect. But does this also happen when we scale into higher rarities and more desirable cards? Let's take a look at some of the rares. Compared to the uncommons, the special guest rares are awesome. Most of them see play in some format or are just really fun cards. Next, we're going to talk about Bridge from Below. Once a modern staple, it was banned. It was going for about $1.50 before the reprint was announced, and the current normal version is going for about $1.05, with the special guest version going for $1.58. So again, the pattern holds here. But let's move up a little bit in price. Underworld Breach is another special guest, and it was going for about $12 before the reprint was announced. This is a crazy card that's banned in Pioneer and Legacy, and the current normal printing is going for about $8, while the special guest version is going for about $17. That means it's spiking a lot on the special guest version and decreasing the price of the normal version, which again is something really great. Underworld Breach is not the only example of prices going up from this. One thing that makes this video kind of hard is that a lot of the dinosaurs that are on the list actually went up in price, but that's not because they were reprinted, it's because there's a bunch of new dinosaur cards, so people are needing the old dinosaurs to build their dinosaur decks. Underworld Breach is not necessarily in that category, but still sees a pretty big spike in its special guest price while seeing a reduction in its normal price, which is really interesting to note. It's interesting looking at cards like Ghalta and Rampaging Ferocidon, and even things like Malcolm, Kenai Navigator. These are all cards that are really important to dinosaurs and pirates and such, and so they see prices that actually have gone up recently. Some cards, however, do not do that. Things like Thrasios, which is a merfolk, actually has a really interesting story. The normal version of the card was going for about $20 before, and now after the reprint, it is going for $20 as well. The price on the normal version didn't go down, but the special guest card is going for about $17. It's actually the first one we looked at where the special guest card is actually the cheapest version of the card. Is it because it's only ever been in weird commander products? Is it because people don't like the art on it? I don't know, it is borderless. I think the art is pretty good. I'm not sure what's happening here with Thrasios. It's definitely interesting to look at though. So far, looking at the rares and uncommons, we're seeing that unless there's some factor that is making the card more desirable, like the set featuring a bunch of dinosaurs and so the dinosaurs are more desired, the normal version of the card will go down by 30 to 50%, and we'll see the special guest version stay at the price the card was and maybe go a little above it, especially if it has cool art or isn't a card that has a lot of other variants. But let's see if that holds true moving into the Mythics. These are the rarest and the hardest ones to get, and so in theory they should have the lowest impact on the prices. The cheapest mythic you can get is Calamax the Stormsire, a card originally from Commander 2020. It was going for about $1 even before it was announced, and now you can pick up a normal version of it for about 50 cents. So we're seeing that same 50% reduction in price, but it's still a cheap card, but we see it double in price, going up to about $2 for the special guest card. This kind of holds true, but it is definitely a cheaper card, especially for being a mythic, so let's see again if that holds true as we scale up the price. The next cheapest card you can get in the mythic slot is Miri Weatherlight Duelist. This was a card that was reprinted in Commander Masters and was going for about $3 because of that. Now, however, after its reprint, you can pick up the normal version for about $2.40, so that was about a 20% reduction in price, but you can pick up the special guest card for about $3.63. So we're seeing the same thing. We're seeing a reduction in price of the base version, but the special guest card costs more than the card did originally before. The same holds true for Lord Windgrace. Kind of quickly going through it, it was going for about $4. You can now pick it up for about $3.13 or get the special guest version for $5.55. I think this art, by the way, is really cool. Now, Carnage Tyrant kind of has that same issue that the other dinosaurs had before. It's going for $8.84 now, and it was going for about $6 or $7 before, but the special guest version here is actually more expensive than the base variant, so we can kind of have that still established that special guests are going to be worth more than the base variant, even though they're new reprinted cards compared to the original versions of the cards. What throws us all out the window is Polyraptor, which has recently spiked in price, where its base version is going for $32.05, and its special guest version is going for $24.89. The art here is still really, really cool, so it's not necessarily an art thing. I think it's just there's a lot of circulation of Polyraptors right now because so many people are wanting them for their dinosaur decks, but it's definitely an interesting phenomenon and is one of the few cards where the special guest version is cheaper than the base version. But again, we can't really look at the impact of the reprint here because there's a lot of demand spiking the price up higher. Now, the big reprint, the big thing that they got everyone excited with was Mana Crypt, of course, and this is a really expensive card. Before it was announced, the card was going for about $200, and that price has definitely gone down. You can now get a Mana Crypt for about $150, which is a significant decrease and is really, really great. The special guest version is going for $186.89, and so that is a lot closer to that $200 starting price, kind of following the formula we've seen. So that kind of brings me to the point of this video. Do the special guests matter? You know, a while ago they introduced the lists into set boosters and they had mystery boosters, and they really didn't impact pricing because there were hundreds of cards that were rarely found in set boosters, and so no one individual card lost a ton of value being reprinted on the list. These, however, are a lot more concentrated, only having 18 of them. Even though they still show up only rarely, they still have a significant impact on the price, and that means this is another way Wizards can reprint cards and get playable things into people's hands. But I think there's another angle to this. I think the reason special guests happened was because Commander became the most popular format. In the past, when Standard was one of the most popular formats and you'd play it every week at FNM, they could just print Standard sets that had printed cards that were good in Standard, and that was enough to get people to go out and buy packs. Now you need stuff that are good in a format that is eternal legal, meaning you either have to have really significant power creep like we saw in Throne of Eldraine, or you have to have some other gimmick to get people to want to buy the sets. Special guests allow every set, whether there's a mechanical reason or not, to have these extra cards in them that allow them to put chase cards and cards for Commander players while focusing on keeping the set as a Standard set. I will say Lost Caverns of Ixalan is a very powerful set with a lot of very powerful cards in it, but I think the special guest is a really great way to keep players of all sorts of formats interested in upcoming releases, and I really like the special guest slot, especially now knowing that it actually does impact the pricing on cards. So that's my deep dive into special guests and whether they actually matter for the reprint value. I want to know your guys' thoughts on special guests as a whole, and if you pulled any from your packs, let me know in the comments below as well. If you want to see more content from me, you can check out this video where I talk about 10 cards that need to be in Ravnica Remastered, or you can check out my Commander deck tech for Tetsun Gnome Champion. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.